Okay, so this is going to be a video tutorial on how to memorize Ohm's Law. And this is something that I was taught at Swellcat about a month ago. So, as the story starts off, as Americans, when we often try to speak Spanish, what do? We add an O to the end of everything we say. So remember that for later on because it's important. So let's start off here with Joe Lineman. Had worked his whole life and he'd saved up a lot of money and it's finally time to retire. So Joe retires and he moves to Mexico. Once Joe's in Mexico, he goes out and he buys a section of beach because that's where he's going to hang out for the rest of his life. And on Joe's beach, he had a pier sitting there. And Joe's sitting there drinking a beer and he's like, you know, that pier looks awful. So we're going to fix that pier. So let's start off with Joe having a pier. All right, so Joe has a pier. So what's Joe do? He needs some help to finish this pier out and make it look good. So he calls down to the hall and they send over two linemen to help Joe. And the first thing that they do as linemen is they go ahead and set the poles. All right, and the next thing what they do as linemen is they add the cross arms. All right, so they now have these cross arms, and on adding this last cross arm, one of the linemen accidentally gets hit in the face with the cross arm. So they decide that the best thing to do was to go to the ER. So Joe takes the other lineman, he drives him to the ER. So we've got our ER, and the other lineman, since there's two of them, they both go to the ER. All right, so they get everybody checked out, everything's fine. And they decide that they need to get back to the project, back to the pier. But on their way there, they decided they're hungry, and they stopped off and got some pie. So while they were gone, the other lineman had finished up all the tasks that were necessary, and there was just one other thing left to do and go through the punch list, or after the punch list, and that was just to make sure that everything on the pier was square. So we square the ends. All right, so we've got our ends squared there. Now, as the linemen are sitting there drinking beer, having a good time, they see a surfer out there in the ocean riding a wave-o. So let's start with W-A-V-O. All right, so this is where we actually relate these formulas, or these trees of formulas, down here to our watts, amps, volts, and ohms. So starting off with our watts. Now our watts is measured in power. So what we'll do is when we come to one of these trees and we're trying to figure out watts or trying to write our formulas for our watts, we're going to cover up that P and see what's left. So on this one we have our P, so let's ignore the P, and we have E squared divided by R for watts. All right, see that? Let's jump over here. Okay, there are no P's for power. Let's jump over here. All right, we have one here. So let's just cover that up and we have E times I. All right, and for our last one, we have our P. Let's ignore it. We've got R times I squared. All right, let's move over here to our amps. So on this first tree here, we don't have anything for amps, which is represented by I, all right, or current. So we're going to ignore the I here, and we have E divided by R. All right, our next one, we've got our I for current. We have P divided by E. And then finally, we have our I squared, and we have our P divided by R. All right, so that gives you your rundown there of that. So next we've got our volts, which is represented by E, our electromotive force. So coming up here to the top, we have E, and we have PR. Now, or P times R. Now, it's kind of tricky with PRs, all right? And it was told to us that it was party rocking. And whenever you're party rocking, you got to raise the roof. And when you raise the roof, you got to have a roof to raise. So in order to get a roof, we do a square root of anything that is PR. And there are two formulas throughout this entire Ohm's Law that require squares on them. And so you'll see the other one here in just a minute over on Ohms. So we've got that one done. Let's come over here and we have our electromotive force again. We've got I times R. And then finally, let me see, right here, we can cover up our E and we have P divided by I. All right, finally, we're to our ohms. So let's come over here and look for R for resistance. Let's cover that up and we have E squared divided by P. Next one, we have E divided by I. And finally, we have our P divided by I squared. Oh, and also on amps is where the other party rockin' was. I misspoke whenever I said it was on ohms. So there we go. We have our PRR. So I kind of got a little bit of that wrong, but I think you get the gist of it. I'm going to make another video that goes over the ripe chart, which is where we will actually use these.